Hey guys, so I actually just got a question asking if I can talk about lowering with these devices. So I'm going to make a video about it. First thing I'm going to talk about is a device in auto locking mode if you need to lower your climber down any specific length. And I'll talk about the older way of doing it, and then I'll actually show you guys a newer way, which involves separating the load strand from the brake strand. But first things first, let's talk about the older way. So everyone has seen one of these devices. They've seen this little hole right here. And the idea of that hole is actually to redirect the brake or redirect the whole device so that way you can let rope slide through if you need to lower your climber. And really, this is like if you need to lower them a long ways, because one thing you can do to lower them a short way is just take the carabiner and ratchet it like that. And you can see how I release rope maybe about an inch or two at a time, and so that's a good way to get someone down like 6 or 7 feet or so. Another way that you see a lot, so you can take a carabiner and stick it in this hole just right in some way. It helps if you have one with without this little hood over the nose, but you can take the carabiner, hook it in here, and pull this thing up a little bit more so that way rope slides out a bit smoother. There are a couple of pitfalls to that, and one thing is you need to have a third hand on the brake strand if you're going to do that, because it's really easy to lose control and drop climbers, which people have done plenty of times in the past. The way I'm going to show you in full is where we take some sort of material. Dyneema works pretty well. And you stick it in that hole. There you go. Just girth hitch it. Now, I have a really long sling on this, but you can use a double length if you have one of those. All right, and then we'll just hook this around somewhere up above. Then I'll leave that for now. One thing you do have to make sure you have is a third hand on the brake strand. So I'll just quickly set up one of those. You can use any hitch you want. I'm gonna use an auto block. And test that. Then you also have to make sure that you redirect the brake strand, because if I were to open this up right now, you can see how it's more or less like a top rope belay, and all that's holding my climber is my third hand. Where if I redirect the brake strand simply by putting another locker up into the belay, and I'll lock that down. Now I can actually maintain some braking power when this whole thing gets flipped, which I'll show you after I flip it. So now I'll go ahead and put a knot just to shorten the sling a bit. There we go. And I'll grab some sort of carabiner, any carabiner that I have on me. It can be a locker, it can be a non-locker, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to sit down, which will cause this whole thing to flip up, and yes, it is pretty messy. There we go. And so once those strands are separated, you see how this carabiner keeps the brake strand in the brake orientation. But now if I release rope from my auto block, there you go, and it's going to do whatever it wants. And you see how the climber strand starts eking through. Now this setup has a lot of friction to it, so it is really nice to use that. There we go. If you ever need to stop the lower, then you just simply stand up and then it will go back to its auto blocking. But it does have a few drawbacks in that it does have a lot of friction, and if you're lowering someone down like a slab or something, then that amount of friction can make it hard for them to go down. Like you have to direct them to maybe push back on the rope depending on your setup because of the amount of friction. Whereas if it's like totally overhanging and the climber's hanging in space, this will go down with any setup, probably no problem. But if you have the added friction of the climber standing on a slab, that can affect how well it lowers. So that's the old way of doing it. It works on pretty much any load braking device. I had a question that specifically talked about the GG, if you had it set up like that. And essentially what you do is you have it set up the exact same way where the climber's strand is above and the brake strand is below. but instead of hooking through this little hole right here, there we go. You take the Dyneema and hook it through this hole and then lift it up and cause that descending. So that's how GG recommends, how Kong recommends to lower with the GG. But lately there's been this new system. We call it the LDS system, load strand dependent system. And I like to do this with a double length sling. What we're gonna do is we'll redirect this up to the anchor, and then I'm going to clip this carabiner on my climber strand, bring it back. I think it works best if the spine is along the middle of your device, something like that. We'll go ahead and clip the double length to that. I'm gonna shorten this one up as well. Clip that to my harness. Notice how these are all non-lockers, because if anything fails, you're just going to go back onto the ATC, so that's no big deal. And now I'm going to sit back, and that separation of the climber strand and the brake strand is what I can use to lower my climber. Yeah, pretty neat, huh? One thing you can do, that, and if you lean back up, it all pinches again. If your climber is, that works well if your climber can't unweight the rope. If your climber can, however, unweight the rope, then one thing you can do is take a locker. You say, okay, climber, unweight for a second. Bring it in. Okay, go ahead and sit back down. And now they're good to go. The only problem here is you have to get them to unweight again if you want to bring them back into belay from above mode. So that's not exactly the best primary lower you can do. I'm about to show you a good primary lower where if you're actually starting from the top of the crag. But this is in case you belay your friend up and they have some sort of problem that you have to bring them back down. You lower them back down to the ground. A couple fast ways to do it. All right, so now let's talk about your primary lowering system. This is in case you're at the top of a climb and you're gonna lower down and belay your friend back up. You see these in plenty of different places. Some crags in the desert are top access sites. Also, other places like Ouray Ice Park is pretty much all top access. So this is a very useful skills to know. A lot of people tend to just do the Munter hitch in this case to lower someone down. Sorry, I missed a turn right there. There we go. Rope's twisting me out. And this does work as a primary lower, and you can also bring people back up because as they lower down, you can control the descent. And if once they start climbing back up, the hitch just flips over and you can bring them up. The problem with this is, one is you have to keep a very tentative belay. Two, if you're belaying someone who's a bit heavier, this hitch can be a bit harder to hold on to this hitch with the amount of friction it provides if you have someone heavier. I had to hold someone like this on a Munter hitch for at least 5 minutes before, and it was killing me. I had to wrap the rope around my hands, and I was holding down, and it was very strenuous. Another thing is that if you have gloves or some other material in your hands, like if you are belaying at Ouray, it can actually cause rope to slip a bit through, and you have to grip extra tight. So one thing you can do is utilize an auto or a belay from above device, and you're going to set it up so that way it's a redirected lower. So I got my climber strand here. I'm just going to load that up with the pictures that you can't see on this thing anymore. Climber side, brake side. So I'm going to put it in, clip it through my device, lock that carabiner, and then I'm going to redirect the brake strand. Like before, if I just belay someone down like this, you notice how there's no friction, and I'm pretty much just holding them with my hands. And unless we're Dean Potter, that's pretty hard to do. So one thing you can do is hold your hand up, and you see how I'm engaging the brake right there? But this is actually very strenuous to do, and it also means I'm only holding with my one hand. So if I let go, my climber's gonna drop. So what we can do is redirect the brake strand. You do want the carabiner, this redirection one, to be smaller than this or the same size. These two are the same size. And then put a third hand on. we go. Test it. One more wrap. There we go, that's not going anywhere. And then another thing I will do before I lower my climber is I have a locking carabiner up in the shelf right here. And notice how this is a 1-point anchor, so that means instead of clipping on top or bottom of the shelf, of the knot, you're gonna clip on the side of the knot to make sure you have both strands. All right, cool, so we're all set up to go. You can do your double checks and stuff and start lowering your climber down. Okay, so the climber's at the bottom of the climb now. What I'm going to do is, usually I give them a little bit of slack with my third hand, just a little bit of working space. And then the climber starts going up, starts climbing up. Bring the ATC to your locker, lock it down, and just belay them like normal. And then they get to the top, or if they fall, then the ATC just goes right back into what it does best. The biggest thing with this setup is make sure that your master point has enough space. This is a lot of space. If you have about that much, you just want you don't want the carabiner to be back here or super closed in, because that can make things annoying when you're trying to pull in rope. So you just want a little bit of space between your master point. But then you're all good to go. And this is my personal favorite way of a primary lower system, is the redirected plate. And it kinks the rope the least amount among all of them. The Munter hitch kinks the rope a whole lot, which can be annoying. And it is just, well, in my opinion, it's more of a smooth way to bring someone down from the crag. One thing you do have to watch out for that's nice is avoiding twists. So if I had this flip the other way, you see how there's a twist that's put in right there. So a good thing to watch out for is have the brake side of the ATC and the redirect closer to you, and the climber side way over there. And that'll help keep the system nice and neat. A lot more people nowadays are using assisted braking devices like Grigris to belay their friends up and just work with at the belay station. I find them really nice, especially if your rope is really thick. If you have like a 9.8 or something thicker, it can be kind of hard to pull it through something like an ATC when it's in auto or guide mode. And so in that case, I'll definitely go to a Grigri. And it just has a few things you got to watch out for, especially if you're going to lower someone from above. So let's say my climber weighted it. And now, instead of just pulling the lever back and lowering them, we run into that same pitfall of it going into a top rope anchor where it's just my hand. We want to redirect the strand and then actually lower. You'll notice with these assisting braking devices, it's not exactly part of the industry standard, at least so far on this day, to have an auto block or some sort of friction hitch backup for the brake system. And that's because we do have this camming unit right here, where if for some reason something happens, I can just let go of the cam unit and then the whole system stops. Now this isn't hands-free, so don't take your hands off. If you do have to go hands-free for whatever reason, you throw in a knot. Yeah, and I may even go as far as to take it out of the redirect, just so that way if anything happens and I bump this device, that knot's going to stop all progress. That is the end-all be-all right there. And so that's something to keep in mind. The other devices aren't hands-free, but this one is very important that you keep it hands-free because it does have that camming unit, where if you're close to some rock, it also can easily interrupt that brake assist, and then you're screwed. But other than that, that's the only difference with lowering with a Grigri from above is redirecting that brake strand.